Welcome, Jamie. Welcome, Tato. How's it, Roger? If you can't hear me, please let me know. I've just put together a short PowerPoint presentation, and preceding this this meeting today, we talked about preparation, body positioning, and reaching full slide length. There you can see Kirsten McCann, I think in Sarasota, before she won, in a really good catch position and ready to get onto her feet. All right. The important thing about blade entry is to make sure that the blade enters the water on full length and that you then can connect to the force on your feet. If you don't connect where you reach, this is called slip. It's basically the difference between where you're reaching to and where you are connecting to the boat. Focus points for today, guys. So we're going to start with connection. Let me just check there. Rosemary, if you don't mind, won't you turn off your mic? Thank you. All right. Connection is basically the connection between the system that's you, your boat and your oars, that's your system, and the water or the dam. Okay, we need connection to apply force. Fundamental concepts, one needs to try and see them as connection and force and load. And we need to try and understand that yes, we need connection to apply force, and yes, we need force to have connection, but we need to try and understand those as slightly separate entities. Okay, to explain this, you can row at a low force, but still be completely or very connected to the boat. And on the other side of it, pushing as hard as you can does not necessarily mean that you are well connected. For example, you might be shooting your slide, or later in the stroke, you might have lost connection with your feet and no longer be propelling the boat. So it sometimes helps to see connection as binary. Either you are connected to the boat or you are not connected to the boat. And that's something that you need to develop. Some simple drills. If someone could just turn their mic off there, please. Some simple drills. The most simple drill is actually just literally getting someone to sit at front stops on the ergo and hold onto the handle and just offer them some resistance and tell them to push against you. They need to be able to produce force that you can feel without the slide actually moving. All right, so now we move on to the first part of the drive. And I think the most important thing to understand about that is that once you connect, your seat has to move the same distance as your handle. Otherwise, you're either opening up your back too much, so the handle is moving ahead of the seat, or you are pushing your legs without moving the handle, which means that you are shooting your slide. So we talked about the recovery last week and getting into a good position. You just need to try and get athletes to move in, catch, and then push off. They need to feel that they can push off. You'll notice I've taken 1 foot out. This is a drill that's used extensively by the national squad. And basically it gives you a sense of where you are relative to the ground. And it does help athletes to feel the connection in their back Okay, you might, I might be opening, I might be shooting. You judge for yourself. I have seen an innovation recently, I think on Instagram, where there's basically a contraption that is attached to the seat, and it gives you a reference point. You adjust it so that at the catch it's in line with the handle, and it sits just underneath the handle here, I think, or I guess it could sit here. And then what happens is the athlete learns how to push off with the handle moving exactly the same as what's happening on the seat. And as we spoke about last week, one needs to make sure that athletes need to understand that changing direction is important. You'll find that if you get to the catch and pause, they will tend to have a fault. Normally, if you pause, the only way that if you pause with the knees, the only way that you can connect with a wheel that's spinning is to actually either pull or to open onto the back too early. And what you're trying to achieve on the first part of the drive is to suspend your body weight off the seat. Okay, we'll talk about that more in the slide presentation. But if you can push off and take a large amount of your mass off the seat, it means that effectively gravity and combined with your body weight is being put on the spoon rather than on the seat. So there are two components to driving the boat. Firstly, the force that you can actually generate from your muscles, and secondly, the amount of your body mass that you can suspend off your seat. It's not that you want athletes to completely come off their seat at the catch. Obviously, you need to take mass off the seat and be able to hold right the way through the drive so that you can accelerate. Okay, but the basis of today's discussion is, in South Africa, we don't come into the catch and row onto it with our backs. We don't row onto it with our arms. We try and fix the position in the recovery early, glide into a strong position, and then make sure that the seat and the handle are connected. Okay. Obviously, we need to connect as early as possible, and just to go over it one more time, just that first point that I made is you don't want the handle to overtake the seat, which is what's happening there, and you don't want the seat to overtake the handle, which is happening there, because that is there's no connection on that. There's lots of connection here, but it's not a sustainable connection where you can keep suspended.
Yes, AJ, I did get that. It was good.
Okay, thanks guys. Appreciate it. I'm just going to finish off with a PowerPoint presentation. Sorry, it's been so stop-start. Just going to quickly share my screen and go through the last bit. All right, so I was talking about connection and just the first drill, which is literally, especially with young guns, is teaching them how to connect with their feet. So holding the handle and getting them to connect without moving their bum. I think that's probably the most basic lesson in connection. And then obviously the foot down exercise, which I explained in the video. But you can see that online as well. There's a lot of examples of people using that. So the question comes, how much force should you use? Okay. And I think the best answer to that question is as much as you can keep. So it's not necessarily about soft or hard catch, and you'll often hear people talking about soft or hard. It's about getting together an efficient, forceful arc. Okay. more sequence styles, and I like to think South African style is quite sequenced, tend to result in a high peak force and subsequently can also allow for really good sprinting speeds as well. You also get countries which row in a less sequence style, where there's more of a blend between legs, arms, and body all the way through, and they will achieve less peak force, but will argue that they could create more sustained force. But yeah, interesting nonetheless. But we don't need to get into that too much. The point of this is to understand how South Africans row, and we go for a sequence drive, and we push the footboard off the beginning. And as I explained in the video, it's not about opening and certainly not about shooting. It's about holding and pressing. All right, positioning. Okay, without positioning, we decrease the chance of actually connecting to the blade. Obviously, that means the seat moving without the handle, which is what I explained in the video. Without positioning, you increase the chance of a disproportionate force loading. So if you fall over just before the catch, you will see a lot of athletes, they tend to fall over and then try and open up out of the catch. That can lead to having a massive force early on, and then a huge drop off on the force curve later on. Okay, and the application of force, I think we just need to break it into two parts. First of all, there's the muscular contraction, okay, without which we can't have the second element, which is the suspension of the body weight. Okay, suspension of your body weight is really important when it comes to efficiency in rowing. Okay, and basically all you're doing is you're taking your own body mass and using it to propel the boat rather than to push the boat down into the water. So you're taking your body mass, you are applying, obviously gravity is keeping you down in the boat, but you are putting that force and that weight through your feet to drive the boat, rather than to just sit on the seat. And hence, again, emphasizing the need for position. It's very important that you understand that if your shoulders are in front of your hips, it is easier to create a suspension on your seat. As soon as your shoulders pass your hips, you will be driving, but your weight will be mainly going down into the seat and into the boat. Okay, so if we're going to talk about what are we trying to achieve in this early phase, it's all about force. Okay, we need to get force on the boat as early as possible, but the question is how much, and we've already touched on that, talking about suspension, etc. But if we were to have an ideal force curve, it would actually be a rectangle. It means that we would have immediate force, hold that exact force, so obviously the maximum force that we could produce, hold that exact force, and then have an immediate ceasing of that force. That would, in physical terms, it would cause linear acceleration, which is not actually possible. Okay, so what we look for, and I'm sure you guys have played around a little bit on the ergos, looking at the force curves, etc. But just to explain this a little bit more, to be practical, there are natural tendencies for each athlete. Some will get a very high initial force, and then some will get slower onto it and then have a higher force later on in their curve. Obviously, different boat classes may require peak force earlier or later, depending on how fast they actually move. And some athletes may be short and able to produce a high peak force, and you have to take advantage of that. And some athletes may be able to produce a good overall force, but struggle to produce a high peak force. Okay. So in SA, we focus on using the legs to initiate the drive. That is what we want to discuss today. Okay. We focus on sequencing the drive, but not for each element to be completely separate. It has to be coordinated. And we'll go into that later on. The following slides are ones that I've taken from the Concept 2 website. And the reason I've done this is a lot of coaches have focused on the power curve on the erg machine, and they've asked a lot of questions around that. So I just wanted to include this and just to maybe give some relevance to the actual rowing as well. All right, so scenario 1 is when you have a very high peak, well, not necessarily very high, but you have an early peak, let's say that, applying a big force initially. So you get a big curve going up on a high force, but then it's very difficult for that curve to be sustained. And what ends up happening is that the tail comes down very quickly. Okay, this kind of curve will normally happen when you look at kids that are really opening and kicking at the same time, maybe even gripping with their arms. They can create a huge force early on, but then they can't accelerate, okay? The second one is maybe the ideal curve. Okay, we've gone through what the ideal probably is an actual rectangle, but in practical terms, that's not possible. Okay, the ideal curve means that you're applying a solid effort and force through the stroke. Okay, it results in a fairly rounded bell shape. Okay, more symmetrical, but if you notice the curve, it's normally weighted slightly towards the first half of the curve. Okay, that is normally what you will see in someone who's rowing technically very proficiently. Then this one here is Concept 2, actually call it peaks and valleys. It basically means that a force is being applied erratically. So you're getting a force, then it becomes less, then it becomes more, and there can be even more than one bump on this curve. And this is a sure sign that there is either a very two-piece stroke, or there's a disjointed coordination between the legs, the body, and the arms. All right, and that's the end of my slide presentation. Let me go back. I don't know how long this meeting's been going on now, but it would be great to have some questions. We've got the national coach online, which is great. Maybe, Raj, you up for some questions today? Okay, guys, fire away. Is there anything you guys are interested in or would like to ask anything about? Any questions? Any comments? Malose. Yes, the second curve is probably what would be ideal because you are achieving a sustained force on the boat. Exercises do you recommend to work on this? I would say firstly making sure that the athletes understands the correct sequencing. Okay, so the first part that we've worked on now is about getting the initial part of the force curve moving up. Okay, and then teaching the coordination of how the body must work off the legs and how the arms must work off the body and the legs towards the finish to make sure that we are holding that connection. Any exercises offhand you can think of, Raj? You put me on the spot there. Any suggestions from anyone else? Which boats are most similar with regards to power curve? Mohammed. I think it all has to do with velocity. Boats that move faster, in theory, have a shorter drive time, which means that to apply an efficient force, one needs to get onto it as early as possible. So, i.e., if you don't get onto it, you'll miss it. I mean, the most similar boat classes would be an 8 and a quad, for example, or a single and a pair. You know, it all has to do with speed and how much time you have to actually lay the force down.
How's it, AJ? I wanted to ask a question.
Yes, go for it. Who's that, Willie?
Yes, it's me, Willie.
Hi, Willie.
How's it? I wanted to ask, how important is your hand height, or are your hand heights, when focusing on this front or the frontal part of getting the drive going? Because I can imagine if you haven't prepared well or your hands are too low in an ergo scenario, then it should affect the way that power curve will shape on the erg if your hands are too low, if you know what I mean. So a lot of boys or girls will, if they're novices, tend to drop their hands as they rock over or get over their ankles, and their hands being too low at the front end, then starting to initiate the leg drive because their hands are not at the correct height. That could affect the way in which they then connect, as you have spoken about today. So how vital is the hand height in getting this connection part going, is my question.
Yeah, I think the handle height is really important. Obviously, if the handle height is not correct, the blade will either be too deep or it will be too shallow. Obviously, I know you're talking about the ergo, but they do need to get into a habit of knowing where the strongest position for them to drive is. And that drill that I spoke about, where you actually hold the handle, you should be able to give them a feeling where they are strongest. You know, drop the handle down, push it down, and say to them, okay, now try and suspend, and they'll be weak in that position. You know, slowly bring the handle up into a position where they feel they can hang naturally off, you know, off their back, and propel the boat. Obviously, the big thing on the ergo is that, you know, a lot of people row the chain in and out on the same plane. Although sometimes coaches will just talk about that slight lift onto the draw plane. So athletes do need to be aware of the draw plane, definitely, and where they are strongest. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Hopefully that answers your question. And remember, the draw plane has to be flat. So they need to find the position. You need to help them find the position or the draw plane where they are strong and they can hold connection all the way through. Roger, do you think the rigging of the boat makes a difference to get the concept of picking up the catch with the legs? Definitely. I don't know if you're referring to gearing there, Rog, or to span specifically. Yes, okay, gearing. Definitely, I think sometimes athletes feel this comfort where if it's heavy, they think they are doing good. So it's heavy, I can feel it, I've got it. Whereas the real finer points of the catch, and I think Roger worked hard on this, very hard on this with a lot of the crews, is that you want to connect the boat without it being heavy. So how do you change direction, still having the highest efficiency on how heavy it is for the athlete? Because when it's heavy, it costs oxygen, and when it costs oxygen, crews run out of steam. So I think that's probably what you're getting at, Raj. I know certainly with the juniors and certainly the crews that I've been coaching at school recently, is I need to sometimes go a little bit lighter to help them to help give them a feel of how they should pick up the boat, rather than going heavier, because it can make athletes a little bit almost lazy. Like, it's easy to feel the boat, but are they able to sustain that at 36 strokes a minute? I don't know if that answers your question. Cool. Thanks, Raj. And Kevin Spence, at what point in the slide do you think the body should start opening? Okay, Raj, you're up. Okay. I think it depends. It depends a little bit on boat class. It depends a little bit on speed, but I would say that between halfway through the leg drive and 3/4 of the way through the leg drive is where the body should start to work against the legs. Remember that the body has to work against the legs to produce a really good force. So I think that's, to answer your question, I would say between half and 3/4 of the leg drive is where the body should come on. Obviously, there are countries that row very differently. There are countries that open from the moment they put the blade in until the moment they take the blade out. They're quite different styles. Let's call it that. But if you want peak force, you need your hips and your back to be working against your legs with speed. And if you bring the back on too early, then what happens is your shoulders pass your hips too early. Then you end up driving the force down into the boat. Whereas if you can hold, if you can push and get good force going with the legs, and then open the back against the legs, you will create a nice high peak force. That makes sense, Kevin? Cool, guys. Okay, well, if there's anything else, feel free. I'm really sorry about the technical glitch. I guess I'll get there at some point in time. Hopefully this was useful for you all, and enjoy the rest of your Friday and your weekend.